The room is too quiet for a place that sells liquor. Late night, back room of a Harlem club, one bare bulb humming above a scarred table. A man in a dark coat slides a sealed envelope across the wood like it weighs more than a gun. Nobody touches it. A thick-fingered hand finally hooks the corner and drags it in, slow, no rush, no mistakes. The envelope is creased once, like it's been gripped too hard. Someone breathes. That from him? The messenger doesn't sit. He keeps his back to the wall, eyes on the door. From Bumpy. And just like that, the air changes, because from Bumpy in a room like this is never a greeting, it's pressure. The man at the table breaks the seal with a thumbnail, careful, like he's opening evidence. Inside is one folded page, no fancy paper, just words that looked like they were written with a steady hand, the kind that doesn't shake for anyone. He reads. His jaw tightens. Across the table, another guy watches his face, not the note. That's the tell. In the underworld, the message is dangerous, but the reaction is lethal. "What's it say?" a voice asks, low. The reader doesn't answer right away. He taps the paper once against the table, a small gesture, like he's trying to knock the line out of his own head. Then he finally says it, almost like he hates the sound of it. He says, "When I'm gone, don't mistake silence for surrender." One beat. Then another short line follows, colder. And he says, "Harlem will remember who stood in the doorway when the lights went out." Nobody laughs, nobody sips. Even the ice in the glasses seems too loud. A third man shifts in his chair, the leather squeaking. That's a threat. The messenger shakes his head once. It's his final words. You need to understand what that means in a city where men are buried with secrets and debts. Final words aren't poetry in this world. They're a lever. The envelope sits on the table like an object you can't throw away. Because you can burn paper, sure, but you can't burn what people repeat. 2 weeks earlier, the rules are already written in small motions. A nod from a barber, a door held open, a cab that doesn't stop when it should. Harlem runs on recognition, on who gets greeted first, on who doesn't have to raise their voice. A brown paper bag changes hands near a doorway, light as groceries, heavy as survival. Inside those bags, in those pockets, in those glances, there's always the same math. Who controls the flow? Who keeps the peace? Who pays when the police decide to make their numbers for the month? That morning, a patrol car rolls slow past a block it knows too well. Tires whispering, 2 uniforms staring straight ahead like they're not staring at anyone. Heat without contact, warning without words. In the corner of a diner, a man flips a coin on the table, once, twice, listening to it ring. That coin is an anchor, a reminder. Money is loud, even when nobody speaks. A waitress sets down coffee. The cup clinks against the saucer. Small sound, big meaning. Life goes on in front of danger like it's normal. Across the street, a storefront is half lit, half dark. And that's Harlem sometimes, half business, half battleground. People call it the neighborhood. The underworld calls it territory. Same sidewalks, different rules. 2 nights later, a private room behind another club. No music back there, just muffled bass through the wall and a table with a deck of cards that nobody is playing. A man says, "He's getting older." Another voice answers, "Old don't mean weak." A third voice cuts in, impatient, counting with his fingers like he's tallying losses. Old means the seat opens up. That's how power talks when it thinks nobody's listening, not with gunshots, with vacancies. And in the middle of that conversation is always the same invisible object, respect. You can't hold it, but you can lose it in a second. You can spend it, you can steal it. You can bury a man and still owe it. The The next morning, word moves the way it always moves, through barbershops, stoops, storefronts, and the kind of phones that ring once and stop, not because the line dropped, because the message already landed. Bumpy's not feeling right, someone says, not loud, not soft, just placed into the air like a coin. Another person replies, "Don't repeat that." And that's the thing, everyone repeats it anyway. That afternoon, in a hallway somewhere, a door opens just a crack, a shoulder blocks the view, a hand passes something out, another envelope, another folded note, another piece of the story being carried by paper instead of bullets. The turning point object keeps appearing because it has to. A message is portable. A message can cross lines that men can't. 2 days later, late evening again, the club back room returns. Same bare bulb, same scarred wood, same thick silence. The first envelope is still there, now joined by a second, stacked like proof. The reader looks up, eyes hard. He's setting the narrative. The messenger answers with a tiny shrug. He's setting the room. A man on the side mutters, "We can control rooms." The reader turns the folded paper between two fingers, slow. Not this one. Then he says the line that turns the stomachs in that back room cold, because it sounds like inevitability. People are going to show up. How many? Someone asks, like numbers can make it less real. The messenger finally steps forward, just one pace, and drops the last detail like a weight on the table. Accounts say 5,000. Nobody moves for a full breath, because 5,000 isn't a crowd, it's a statement. It's a wall made of bodies. It's protection and witness at the same time. And if that many people show up after a man's final words, then the words didn't die with him, they multiplied. The reader folds the note again, presses it flat with his palm, and looks straight at the messenger. What does he want? The messenger's eyes don't blink. He wants you to understand something before the funeral. A pause. Then, quiet as a knife sliding out of a sleeve, the messenger adds colder. He wants you in the room when his last line gets read out loud.
The next night, the same envelope shows up again. Not the paper, but the idea of it, because men start acting like a message is already in the air. In a Harlem barbershop, a pair of scissors clicks, steady, while a customer pretends not to listen. On the counter, a folded newspaper sits beside a payphone slip with a number written in pencil, and that pencil line feels like the same sharp edge as Bumpy's final note. 2 hours later, a backroom table gets wiped down too clean, like someone's expecting company. A glass is set down and repositioned, once, twice, until it's perfectly aligned with the table's scratch marks. That's not manners, that's nerves. And in the middle of it all is the same anchor, the envelope, the folded page, the final words that are already being rehearsed before they're even spoken aloud. That morning, the pressure point shows itself in an ordinary object, a stack of bills held together with a rubber band. No names, no numbers said out loud, just paper and ink and the quiet panic of what happens when money stops moving the way it's supposed to. A man behind a counter looks at the stack, then looks away, because the street code is simple. You don't stare at another man's weakness, you just decide whether you're going to use it. 2 days later, a different room, a different kind of quiet, police quiet. A desk lamp throws a hard circle of light over a file folder, and a hand flips a page with the same careful motion the Mafia guy used on Bumpy's letter. Heat is heat, whether it wears a badge or a suit. Outside, a siren rises and falls, distant, like the city is reminding everyone that the walls have ears. You need to understand how final words become power in Harlem. They aren't just a goodbye, they're a trigger you can't unpull. The turning point object isn't a gun here. It's paper. It's a sentence that survives the body. It's a folded note that can cross a street faster than any soldier, because nobody has to admit they're carrying it. They can just say, "I heard," and that's enough. That afternoon, Bumpy's people don't move like they're panicking. They move like they've already measured the room. A man steps into a grocery store with a grocery bag, but his eyes scan the corners like a lookout. Another man pauses beside a parked car, adjusts his coat, and leaves a matchbook tucked under a windshield wiper. Small, stupid-looking object, but it's a signal. And every signal is tied back to the same gravity center. The final words, the crowd, the coming funeral, the promise of 5,000 bodies showing up like a human verdict. The next night, a club hallway becomes a funnel. The bass thumps through the wall, but the real rhythm is footsteps, slow, controlled, spaced out so it doesn't look like a unit. A door opens, closes, opens again. Inside, someone slides a second envelope onto the table, thicker than the first. Not a speech, not a confession, just another page that keeps the story pointed in the same direction. A hand presses the envelope flat. The gesture is calm, but the knuckles are white. One voice says, barely above the hum of the bulb, "He's still playing chess." And that line hangs there because it's true. Bumpy doesn't need to be in the room to control it. He only needs the room to believe his words will outlive him. 2 mornings later, the street starts preparing without admitting it. A church door gets checked. A lock gets tested. Folding chairs appear higher than usual. A man sweeps a sidewalk that doesn't normally get swept. These are anchor details that don't look like war, until you realize they're the setup for a moment that's going to hit like a punch. Because 5,000 people don't arrive by accident. They arrive because someone told them the words mattered. That evening, the Mafia side reacts the way they always do when they can't control the story. They try to control the stage. A suited man stands near a doorway, watching the flow of bodies like he's counting them without moving his lips. Another man checks his watch, then checks the door again. Their weapons aren't out, their faces are, and their faces are saying the same thing. If Harlem turns a funeral into a rally, the balance shifts. The next day, Bumpy's advantage isn't muscle, it's timing. A favor gets collected with a single phone call that rings twice and stops. A quiet word gets passed in a restaurant where the silverware clinks too loud. A car circles a block, not to hunt, but to confirm who's already posted up where. Surveillance without drama, leverage without shouting, and every move points towards one inevitability. The day his final words get read and the crowd proves whether the neighborhood belongs to fear or to memory. That night, the envelope returns to the backroom table again, opened and closed like a wound being tested. The paper edges curl a little more each time, as if the room itself is worrying it apart. He runs a thumb along the fold, then stops, as if he's afraid of what the next crease means. He doesn't read it. He doesn't need to. He just asks one question, aimed at nobody and everybody at once. What happens if they really show up? No answer comes quick, because everyone in that room can picture it. The street flooded, shoulders packed, faces turned forward, 5,000 witnesses making it impossible to pretend the final words didn't land. And right then, in that late-night hush under the bare bulb, someone outside the room knocks once. Not a friendly knock, a measured one. The kind that says the next scene has started, whether you're ready or not.
The next morning, the door that got knocked on last night doesn't open into chaos, it opens into planning. A chair is turned to face the backroom table like it's a witness stand, and the same folded paper sits there again, edges softer now from too many hands that never wanted to admit they were afraid of words. That afternoon, the environment tightens the way it always does right before something historic. Cars parked a little too neatly, men standing a little too still, eyes tracking entrances like they're counting heartbeats. In a hallway outside a club office, a coat pocket holds another envelope, and you can tell by the way the hand keeps checking it that the object isn't paper anymore, it's leverage. That night, the final setup happens in the plainest way possible. A phone call that ends fast, a handshake that lasts 1 second longer than comfort, a door that closes with a soft click that sounds louder than a gunshot. Somebody places a small stack of funeral programs on a table, and the paper smell mixes with cigar smoke, like two worlds agreeing to share the same air for one day. 3 hours later, in a quiet room away from music, a man rehearses the moment without saying it out loud. He holds a folded page at chest height, and the page trembles once, then goes still. The turning point object is right there in his fingers, the final words, waiting for the exact second they'll become public property. The next morning, early, the street starts filling before anyone wants to call it a crowd. Shoes scrape pavement, coat sleeves brush. A line forms outside a church-like entrance, and it stretches farther than the doorway can explain. Faces keep arriving in waves, old heads, young kids, working people who came straight from a shift, each person adding weight to the same message. This isn't just a funeral, it's a verdict. 2 hours later, the number becomes the story. Reportedly, it's around 5,000, so many bodies that the sidewalk feels like it's breathing. You see it in the details, strangers sharing space without pushing, hands tucked deep in pockets because nobody wants trouble to start, eyes forward because nobody wants to be the reason the day turns ugly. The Mafia side watches from the edges, and the way they stand, spread out, silent, trying to look casual, only makes them look smaller against that wall of people. Inside, the air is thick with flowers and wet wool coats, and every seat is an anchor. A microphone stands at the front like a thin metal spine, and the room keeps glancing at it, not because they expect a performance, but because they know what a mic does. It takes a private line and turns it into a public weapon. A program rustles, someone coughs, a shoe taps once and stops. Even the smallest sounds feel like they're being recorded by the walls. Then it happens. Exact action, exact reaction, exact consequence. The folded page is opened. The final words are read aloud, not as a speech, but as a clean cut through the room. The line lands, and you can see it hit the Mafia like a punch, not because anyone swings, but because faces flinch the same way they would if they'd been struck. A jaw locks, a throat swallows dry, a hand tightens on the back of a chair until the knuckles pale. No one can stop a sentence once 5,000 people hear it at the same time. The crowd outside reacts like a tide receiving a signal. A murmur rolls forward, heads lift. Some people bow their faces into their hands. Others stand straighter, as if the words just handed them permission to remember out loud. And that's the twist. The final words don't just honor the dead, they assign roles to the living. In that moment, the envelope becomes a banner, the paper becomes territory, and the message becomes protection, because everybody now knows everybody else heard it too. You need to understand what changes immediately after a moment like that. The next morning, the underworld can't pretend it's invisible. A crowd that size turns any move into a public act. Men who used to operate in whispers now have to measure their steps in daylight because 5,000 witnesses don't go back to sleep the same way they woke up. The street code shifts not by force but by consensus, by the simple fact that respect just got counted out loud in bodies. That week, the balance of power tilts in small, brutal details. A storefront that used to lower its gate early stays open a little later. A barbershop conversation that used to cut off when a stranger walked in keeps going. A police car that used to creep slow now rolls past faster, as if it doesn't want to be seen watching. And the Mafia learns the hardest lesson in Harlem. You can intimidate a man in a room, but it's harder to intimidate an entire neighborhood that just turned mourning into a message.
The meaning is sharp because it isn't romantic. Bumpy's final words didn't win a war with bullets. They won a moment with narrative. They proved the real currency wasn't just money or muscle or fear. It was memory, organized and delivered like a punch. And the brutal part is this: once 5,000 people show up for your last line, the men who wanted your seat realize they're not fighting you anymore. They're fighting what you left behind.